running on the background. Welcome to Bitcoin Live on the Wednesday morning with me, Vesa, with me, Nick and Vesa, and I'm still starting up because it's very early in the morning, and I'm not a morning early bird. So welcome to the show, Vesa.
Thank you, Nicholas, my friend. Neither of us are morning people, and technology is failing us, and and whatever. But we're gonna have some nice things to share, I think.
Yeah. So first of all, congratulations with the auction. This is of course about BitRam and the auction with Scarce City, if I'm not. Yeah, right.
Yeah, that's the one. We still have 1 day and 12 hours to go for the before the auction closes, and I'm excited about this one because we've been preparing to have this auction for about 9 months now, I guess. So it's a full full pregnancy to get this out there. I'm not sure what the market condition is really for this kind of a collectible now, but I postponed it a couple of times already and then just said, now we're just going to do it and let's see how it is. But I did put a 0.075 BTC minimum bid on it, so about 5,000 USD, to kind of test the waters, and it's quite a lot of value for 5K if someone is going to only get that for that now. So let's see how the bidding is going to go, because usually it's the last 5 minutes at an auction that things start to happen anyway. But it's the first Bitcoin specific artwork or decentralization specific artwork I've done in like 2.5-3 years or so. So I'm excited to see how people are going to respond to it, and it's a different take on the animal lore, because usually it's the bull and the bear, right?
Yeah.
And but if you think in terms of institutional adoption and compliance and all these different kinds of things, it's still that underlying technology that is an evolution that, you know, when I first came to this space, I started listening to Andreas Antonopoulos, and he was very quick to point out that this is potentially the separation of state and money. And for those who understand the implications of that, know how huge it is and why it's not taken seriously, or there's bargaining or propaganda on all different kinds of sides to try and keep Bitcoin, the real value of Bitcoin, out of the conversation because it's so revolutionary underneath the technology. And this is a little bit about that, is that we all want to be included. We all want to feel like we're invited to the table and appreciated and loved and all that kind of good stuff. But then sometimes you're not. Sometimes you're excluded out of things, not because you're doing the wrong thing, but because you're doing the right thing. And those in power have potentially been doing it not in the best way for quite some time. So it's painful to course correct back to something that is the alignment. So what I'm wanting to say is that I'm not a violent person. Like it's not in my nature this kind of way, and but the artwork itself is asking the question: when is it appropriate to be that kind of a ram at the gates to go through things? Because if innovation, real innovation that is beneficial for the whole planet, is stopped, or people are trying to play dirty games, kind of like, let's say, the horse industry was trying to do when the car industry was starting to take over, then it's appropriate to go unwaveringly towards a vision and towards the future and do real innovation, because that's the shadow side of real innovation to the world, is that it pisses a lot of people off when you disrupt things. And BitRam is really about that whole thing of when it's non-negotiable. It's going forward, it's ramming at the gates, it's doing its thing, whether you like it or not. And you can beg, plead, or bargain, or adopt, or do whatever, but it's going to keep trucking. And it's a reminder of that core thing about what this technology and innovation really means. So it's a physical artwork. I have it here actually with me. It's 2 meters wide, and it works with the Artivive app for the animation, and it's 1 out of 3. So it's quite something. And do you have the video with you? Because I had it with me at Art Basel actually yesterday. So
I'll show it.
because real Bitcoin art still isn't represented at Art Basel in any kind of significant way. There might be some generative thing, whatever, but
Here we go. I'll put it a little bit softer.
so that's how the augmented reality side of it works, and it's a little bit of this sort of street art style because it's excluded out of the serious galleries. It's not there, so it's a little bit of a revolution to kind of do it this way, because in one way you could say that the art world is still pretending like we're in the era of television, and we all have podcasts now. We've had the internet for 20 years, and many things that the general population everywhere is now aware of is not something that is still being accepted within some realms. So I thought it was only appropriate to kind of spread it in the middle of the street and then kind of showcase it, because it's not about the physical location where it's been shown. It's just a demonstration that we have the internet, we have podcasts like yours, and we're going to ram at the gates until this thing is followed through with.
Yeah, and it looks amazing. I mean, all your artwork is really awesome. And can you tell me a little bit more about the AR side of your artwork?
Yeah, well, because I'm originally a filmmaker by education. I was a director for a long time, and I had my own production company for a decade. I made documentary films and short films and music videos and all different kinds of things for a long time. And one of the things that is fun about the whole idea of digital collectibles or decentralization technology is that I get to bring all of my skills to the table, whether it's photography, in contemporary art, or painting, or filmmaking, or all of this kind of thing comes together as a skill set that I get to communicate in whichever way I feel is the most appropriate for the story, and then to combine them, because it's you have, in this particular case, a physical piece that can go on your wall, and then you have the augmented reality side of it that tells the story further, and then you can implement it into your digital space seamlessly in so many different kinds of ways as a collector. So all different sort of formats and in-betweens are taken care of in order to have a lot of value in how to tell the story. And I've done a mini documentary about it as well, which is I think I should send you the website where the artwork is on my own website. But then I'm making another one still today. I'm nearly finished with a second perspective of this artwork. So
yeah, because you also did a whole sort of reel about how you create the artwork from sort of the beginning till where it eventually ends, right?
Yeah, because it's like it's high effort art on many different levels. It's not only that you're painting and then putting something together. I think about these things deeply to try and get another take on the bull and bear animal lore of why the animal itself, which the ram is not so impressive, but how we've utilized the ram. Like, for example, at the Lord of the Rings, when these things are coming through the gate, it's that ram power. It's in all different kinds of Hollywood films, from all the way to Star Trek, when ships are ramming at each other, and that kind of unstoppable force is what it's representing. But there was a funny video as well where there was a bull and a ram going up against with heads like this, and it was the bull that actually flipped over and lost consciousness, even though it's so much smaller, the ram. And I thought of it, and this is a little bit in more of the context that the bull, which is also a Wall Street symbol, of course, even though it looks big and scary, then and Bitcoin is smaller and all this kind of thing, but the head is harder, So there was a little bit of that kind of a take on it, but then it's much bigger than that. It's a It's about when is force justified, when is it necessary. And we have a planet that is inherently violent, and we have a super violent history going all the way back to God knows how long, and
Probably as long as we exist.
yeah, and we would like it to be different. But a part of the reason why it is not different is that we are not truthful, and we're not in reality inclusive of new ideas. And of course, it's understandable, because new paradigms, they change power, and they change, and it's always uncomfortable when the older that I get, the more I have to change and all of a sudden consider AI and all the things that are going to come. You need to maintain flexibility. And if you're going to be truthful about things, then you will always face the Franz Kafka quote. It's something like this. It was, I feel so embarrassed because I now realize that the world is a masquerade. It's a masquerade ball, and I showed up with my own face.
Yeah.
So, and that's a great quote as to sometimes if you are an innovator and an entrepreneur, and you're doing things and you're wondering why some things aren't clicking or going the right way, and it's that and then maybe going further, you go into Maya, how much this is an illusion, the whole planet of ours, and it's beyond humanity as well. Because if you look at planets colliding to one another in space or whatever, that births new paradigms, and how planets are born and all of this kind of thing. It's not usually or necessarily a very pretty project. It's not something that is just all light and love. It can be quite brutal, this natural world of ours. And
we're experiencing it as right now, right? I mean, the birth pains.
Yeah.
And, I also, we were sort of promoting your artwork last week because of the auction, of course. And, when I was sort of thinking about the RAM and the significance, it's also sort of, the classic sign of rebirth, right? And the sacrificial lamb. So I think it's a very apropos image of Bitcoin. And like you said, the bull is more aggressive and a ram is more defensive. And Bitcoin is basically the ultimate defensive system that we've ever created. I think Jason Lowry is a very interesting thinker, even though, some people had sort of criticized his book or his thesis. I think Jameson Loeb sort of took to it. But I think the idea that we are sort of going back from aggressive attacks like we did in the past century, where, with the Blitzkrieg and, these very sort of offensive moves in the military, Bitcoin is sort of a paradigm shift also in that sense, that we're going back to the defensive, like the fortified, and that he points out. And I think, Bitcoin is like the ultimate defensive force that we've ever created on planet Earth, right? So, and that also sort of better fits with a ram than a bull. With a bull is more offensive, and a ram is, sort of the classic defensive animal. And it can pack quite a punch in those horns, right? I mean, you better not be on the other end of those horns when they hit you, even if you're a bull.
Yeah, that's what was so funny, was that little clip where the bull hit, and it's like you could see when this massive animal just loses consciousness and goes like hooves up like that.
Yeah. It's like a brick wall hitting you, right? I mean, and imagine like a bull. My uncle was like a farmer, or he had a farm, and he had like a massive bull there, like, it was like it almost didn't fit into the cage. But when you see the horns on the ram, and sort of the hind legs of the ram, and when it sort of hits, I think it couldn't easily knock out a big bull like that.
And we have these funny things. It's like because now we look at the whole crypto space. You have the institutional adoption and KYC and YML, the whole spiel of whatever, and that then even in events, people are all of a sudden representing these institutions that we were meant to be getting away from, as opposed to now like they're the trump cards, as in like we're doing well, which is eating itself from the inside, this whole thing. And it's like, I just came back from Switzerland late last night from the Swiss Web3 Fest, and it was quite the thing to again remember when people are doing it the right way. There are the big boys at the table from the traditional finance sense, or even crypto banks and whatever. But Ralph in particular, who's the founder of this conference, is still, he will have a t-shirt that says "duck the banks," and then there's this duck kind of funnily there, and then it says in inverted brackets, it's like, "Dear autocorrect, it's never duck ever." And it's actually cost him. It's cost him one of his major sponsors from last year when they saw this, and they were like, "Yeah, we can't be associated." So, but that's the thing about real values. I mean, I've gone through a soft cancellation most of my career, and by soft, I don't mean that it's been soft on myself. It's been brutal for my personal life, but it's been soft in a sense that I wasn't big enough to be loudly cancelled, because then my cause would have just gotten inflated beyond of what they perceive the damage to be if they just kind of exclude me out of everything. And I've had so many of these different kind of experiences that it's incredible. And you would think like how successful, for example, Brittany Kaiser is, because I was hanging out with her in Switzerland now for a couple of times as well. But you look at Brittany Kaiser's, obviously Facebook with Zuckerberg, they've not helped her algorithm. But even with Twitter or X, she barely has something like 20,000 followers. I mean, there's about 5 million articles that have been written about her, and The Great Hack has about 1 billion views on Netflix. It's like if not their most popular film, it's in the top there, whatever. And she barely tweets because there's no point, because the algorithms are still kind of like screwing this whole thing up. Wow. So anyway, that was quite something, by the way. You would have absolutely loved this. It was one of the main events, was this fireside chat between Edward Snowden and Brittany Kaiser. And it was quite something to be in the room, and I had a great seat at the table as well. It felt quite intimate because it was on this big screen, and both of them emotionally telling their stories as whistleblowers and what it really means.
You shared it on Twitter, right?
Yeah. And that was a great reminder as to why I came into this space to begin with, and the 3.5 billion people who are unbanked and whatever. That were the true motivation for an artist to feel authentically inspired to be here, as well as the resources or number go up or whatever. It's good to have these kinds of events where people really stand for the actual thing of what this is for, and be amongst friends while doing it. Because Gordon Einstein was the famous crypto lawyer, and James Bowater was there just just to hear the stories and be a part of the conversation when someone is really representing what the potential is and what the threats are. And you go, wow, man, it was top 3 moments in crypto for me. And there have been quite a few during the last 7 years that I've been in this space. So it was really cool. So whilst something is being discussed that is potentially super dark and kind of depressing, but then at the same time you're in the room going like, this is awesome, So it was a nice juxtaposition.
Yeah, and Snowden is also a very big Bitcoin proponent, even though he does remind us at certain moments that we also have to implement privacy features in Bitcoin, which we aren't doing. And then, you got this whole argument, should we, shouldn't we? And, you got proponents on each side. But like you say, this might be a good time to sort of rebaptize Bitcoin into a ram instead of a bull, and to sort of orient ourselves, or at least look at why we're doing what we're doing, right? I think you're really you're right about pointing that out, right? That we might have sort of lost track of the revolution, like the ideals behind Bitcoin, and that we're too much focused on broad-based adoption, which is, I mean, adoption will come on its own pace, right? We don't have to force it. And you got the right kind of adoption and the wrong kind of adoption, right? If you don't self-custody Bitcoin, then it's actually the wrong kind of adoption, and then maybe we should slow down and focus on the right kind of adoption, spreading the message of self-custody, and number go up. That's and I mean that has been a driving force of Bitcoin, also for the benefit of Bitcoin and the growth of the network. So at the early stage, you didn't really need that number to go up in order to attract people, but as they sort of come into the ecosystem, then they realize, okay, it's not really about the number go up; it's actually about sort of the ideals behind it. But
but actually, like I would honestly say that it's also great to keep on track with the monetary and resource sides as well, because for artists, for creatives, for entrepreneurs and all, money is really important because it's energy. If you don't have money, you don't have energy, you don't have momentum, you can't go forward properly in that kind of way. So ideally, it's like you have the both together. Is that just that energy is flowing in the right direction to the right people so they can do what they need to do, not just get their Lambos or whatever, which is fine if whatever, if you're into that. Lambo's not a big deal, but it's good that you have the resources to be able to sustain yourself and do what you're called to do.
But when we sort of started, you mentioned that we're sort of in the process of a new birth, like in the birth pains, and at the moment, like we got fiat basically unwinding, and Bitcoin replacing it, or most likely. So that makes that whole discussion about where do you actually get real money, right? Is it the fiat or is it the Bitcoin?
But for example, we also have many people who are working in our space that aren't exactly, like, for example, Bitcoin is inherently political. You can't get away from and the NFTs are inherently political. And then you look at big collections, like let's say One of One or those kinds of things, they won't have anything political represented in them. Or now George Buck's show that was at the Swiss Web3 Fest, I couldn't see anything there that, to me at least, represented the true spirit of crypto art. You'd have generative things, you'd have all these different kinds of things that kind of fit the mold of Basil, or the generic art world per se, or what is perceived to be credible and all this kind of thing. But in the spirit of what this thing is, or what the actual message is for creatives and what it means to the world, not even our space is really telling the story of what this is, at least to my feeling, as effectively as they could, so that people could actually recognize why this is important. I mean, if I look at some lines of code that some computers generated and this and that, and it does, and it, to me at least, it doesn't aesthetically look very pleasing nor very interesting, then you're just told that, yeah, here's this line and this and that, and you can now own it and you can put it on a video screen on your wall. I go like, okay, and as opposed to everything that we just discussed, in order for those who might come online thinking that, holy shit, there's something really, really important happening here. So, yes. But unless we, in our credible sort of space of our creative avenue, aren't doing the best job that we can in order to represent this whole space, what chance does it have to be adopted to the more general, let's say, Art Basel sphere, if there's no one there who is revolutionary enough in order to be able to recognize the story so that it could be adopted? So it's like, and this is no shot at anyone. I'm just representing, again, it's not personal. It's just that I did realize that those who are big names in the sort of curatorial side or the fun side of the creative space of this, there's inherently different politics that are being played.
Yeah. So you have a lot of different aspects, both the aesthetic, that you highlight, but also the financial and the revolutionary, right? And all these issues or aspects are sort of conflicting and sort of contradicting also, right? Because on the one hand, you want sort of highlight the revolution, but on the other hand, it sort of hurts you in the process. And also with the financial side, you also have sort of a contradiction, because on the one hand, you need money in order to fund your operations, which is logical. I do the same thing. But on the other hand, you're trying to get as much Bitcoin as you can, because fiat is going down the drain. So you got these sort of conflicting goals and aesthetics, like what you say, like you're like somebody who really tries to elevate art and take it to the next level, and implementing all these different new features of Web3. And on the other hand, you got like many in the space who are more having fun. Let's put it like that, or going for profits, and so there's also a conflict there, right? With and the aesthetics is of course not really yet crystallized. I mean, it's all over the place. I mean, you got a lot of serious NFT artists or crypto artists or digital artists, whatever you want to call yourself, out there, who are trying to give it shape, but it's in a mix, or in a cauldron, or in a melting pot of styles that range the entire gamut, right, from funny and pictorial to abstract and serious, and everything in between that you can imagine. So it's very hard to sort of give it a specific shape, right? I think we're still very early in that regard, and maybe it's also even something that you shouldn't aspire to, or you should. I don't know, but it's a difficult question. Yeah.
And then recently had another experience as well, just joining a panel discussing all of this stuff of what we do, and I felt like I killed it, and I felt like the audience felt it too. And there was this lady gallerist at the panel as well, and very professional, very bright, all kind of good back and forth in the whole panel with everyone. And then I went to talk to her at the end of the panel and went like, so you're a curator, you have a gallery, very interesting. And she was just very rude, kind of like shrugged it off and kind of like made it clear that I wasn't welcome. I was like, well, that was a bit weird. And then went to check the stuff afterwards of what she represents, and there was this super man-hating feminist kind of agenda, like very clearly on the page. And I was like, with the things of what we discussed before, so obviously she had heard of me, and it's such a bizarre paradigm, because like I've said a few times, I've actually dedicated, it's human empowerment, but it's been 15 years of women's empowerment, what I've done with the other side of my artworks. But then, because I'm in the form that I am, and some of the other conflicting ideologies, like beauty has turned to ugliness, or it's rather about the shape and form that I am, rather than what my art represents, that can't be included, and all these different kinds of games that are now legitimized in the art world. I think in the general gallery space and academia, you can be openly as misandric and sort of just exclusionary of people in the most gross way, and feel like that's your safe space to be so. So no matter how crazy your ideology is, and it just goes unchallenged and keeps repeating itself into these different kinds of things. And that's also kind of revving back to my own career and my own side of the, when is being forceful and going towards your vision unapologetically and representing who you are and what you're doing. Because if you don't tell your story, if you don't become a whistleblower to these things at all, then they win, because their weapon is silence. They're blatantly one thing like this, and then even though some are going to say that, oh, we're so inclusionary and we're this and that, but in fact they are the opposite of it. And what I've been trying to say here is that it's fine that everyone has their avenue and they represent who they are, but we now have the internet as opposed to the television. You can't control this anymore. You can't in the art world pretend like Jordan Peterson didn't happen. You can't pretend like not all of these things that are the collective ideas of humanity aren't battling it out in the most important sense at the moment. And if the further into the bubble people try to go, the more the internet is going to ram them down.
Yeah, and I mean, it also takes time, right? As Thomas Kuhn said, that usually, people, the old guard needs to die before the young ones take over with the paradigm shifts. So let's hope that's not necessary, but that's usually how it happens. Like before a scientific revolution happens, the old guard needs to disappear before the new can come in. But so it takes time. But I think also like we said before, like this revolution or that idealism that Bitcoin represents, it actually represents what you're talking about. That people can actually be themselves, speak out, and that it's okay to be different, right? You can be anything you want. I don't mind LGBTQ or whatever. Like you can be transgender or homosexual or whatever you like to be, but as long as everybody else can be whatever they want to be, and
Exactly.
and talk about it and promote it if they want to do that or not, right? So, but basically, what Bitcoin does, it gives individuals the power to be an individual again. And
it's like, because it's sorry to interrupt.
the revolution does need to succeed, of course.
Well, no, I'm returning to the point of what you just said, that it's cool that everyone is who they are, and just as long as the other ones are. I have a more problem with the like, let's say you're transgender or LGBTQ, like all whatever. That's who cares? It's your personal. Opportunity, and this goes the same for any community pretty much. If there is an underlying tone of psychopathic narcissism that is already all of a sudden taking over and influencing children inappropriately in places where those kinds of contents or things don't belong at all, then that is the thing that I have an issue. It's the psychopathy and kind of changing legislation from a super minority perspective to be very harmful for a major majority. Then that is what I have an issue. I don't care about who you fuck or what you do in your that's we got there in the 90s already, I feel, that, and we've just being kind of spinning out of control in the public sphere, thinking that there's some sort of oppression happening, whereas it's more like it's become a repression tool for something that is just wholesome and healthy. And that's what I feel the majority of the people have an issue with. And then secondly, they have an issue with feeling like they have to be on eggshells and super afraid to represent not only what is the majority, but also something that is healthy needs to be repressed out of the way of something that is just, something entirely different. So we're simultaneously having so many different discussions, and people are trying to mask what it is that they represent with something else that looks angelic on the bottom, which is really not that once you scrape the surface. And those are the things that make the conversations really hard, because then if you like, who's for, I hate, like someone says, I hate racism. Well, the majority of the planets is going to agree with you.
Yeah, we also touched upon that last time, but I think looking at the 90s and early 2000s, we were already on the right track, right? I think if they didn't do anything, if it wasn't sort of enforced from the top down, as they did, like a very draconian, very repressive way, I think, and they would have just let society do its thing, I think it would have already been gone. I think, by doing it from the top down and in a very draconian and repressive way, they're actually creating what they're trying to eradicate. They're creating new races, they're creating new intolerance, because normal people, decent, law-abiding, open-minded people who before were not even thinking about these things and were just accepting them as as a normal feature of society, started to think like, oh, so I am intolerant, I am abnormal, I'm, so they're starting to identify with, far right populists, which they didn't do before, right? So they're creating a new ground for these things. And if you ask me, I think I think it's all happening on purpose, because fiat is all about dividing and conquering. And I think it's very Orwellian, because they're, like you say, they're doing it in the guise of the exact opposite. It's precisely Orwell, right? It's peace is war, So in my opinion, this is not a coincidence. I think it's the fiat system trying to save itself. And because, as fiat implodes, what does it do? It sacrifices the periphery as it sort of eats its way inwards until, at the very end, the last thing that fell in the Roman Empire was Rome, right? It sacrificed all the provinces around the edge of the empire, and then slowly it ate inwards. And that's what's happening now. They're sacrificing everybody. They're throwing everything under the bus, from the pharmaceutical industry, the trust that we had in healthcare, the trust that we had in the legal system, the trust that we had in politics. All the trust is being erased in order to save the system. Everything is being weaponized in order to save the system. Eventually, that will destroy the system, unless they can reboot it in an even more repressive way, which I think that's what they're aiming for. But in the meantime, they're trying to buy time and to, let us fight each other in every which way they can. But that's my personal opinion, and I know it's very tinfoil hat and very out there, but that's how I see it.
No, it's not out there. It's accurate. It's what I find is the most bizarre thing about this whole thing is to how high of a degree of the boiling water as crabs people are willing to adjust to in order to avoid facing uncomfortable facts about them having to readjust their worldview of where they live, what the world is like, and the systems around them.
The shifting baseline, right?
Yeah, it's the people who are most. And again, I return back to the BitRam thing. When is it appropriate to start feeling like and saying, hold on a minute, this is not healthy for me, this is not healthy for my surroundings, I better get out of this pot because the water's boiling and my skin is like really getting I don't think this is going into the right direction. So but I think that's the most dangerous thing at the moment is our, let's say, toxic empathy, our adjustability to a paradigm that we shouldn't adjust to. It's
people have forgotten or unlearned how to say no, right, and how to draw a line in the sand, and it's a shame because it didn't have to come to this, and then you got the other group going in the opposite direction, right? Becoming too extreme on the right or the left, right? So it's creating this sort of polarization in society that while we should try to reach for the center and but the only way to reach the center is actually to listen to each other and to be open about stuff and to be yourself, to be able to be yourself, right? Otherwise, you can never ever reach the center of anything. If there's no tolerance for, like, real tolerance for a diversity of opinions and a diversity of ideas, because that's basically the only real difference that matters, right? It doesn't really matter what color of skin you have or how you were born as a woman or a man or what gender preference you have. I mean, that's all also important, but if you cannot speak your mind, all of that doesn't you're basically throwing away what makes you really human, is that you can think rationally and that you have free will and that you have that you can perform actions in real life, right? The negative freedom that Josiah Berlin speaks about. Positive freedom is actually what is eroding everything in society. It's a minority, intolerant minority, which is deciding for the majority what should and shouldn't be happen and where all the resources should be located, or relocated, or misallocated, I should say.
Well, if you look at something like the body positivity movement, it's like this whole thing is still, and why I keep hanging on to merit as one of the beacons of things, is that being alive is brutal and work is brutal. And it's that old saying that everyone wants to be a bodybuilder, but no one wants to lift them heavy ass weights. It's, and it's gone, the degeneration of ideas and things have gone to the point that people have gotten so comfort seeking that they would try to change the laws and dynamics of the universe rather than actually put in some work. So then, okay, so if I'm disgustingly obese and about to die because I can't get my addictions or my my sort of trauma in control, I'll then start campaigning to change the laws of physics or health or whatever in order to, and spread that thing around without any responsibility whatsoever. And it's just clearly trauma. It's just clearly your inability to have any sort of control over your own life, and it's spinning out of control. And then
and that's also why the BRICS are winning, right? I mean, when you sort of look at the geopolitical landscape for a second, the BRICS are actually, they got the momentum, and they know they have the momentum, and the only thing they have to do is wait us out, right? Because the whole financialized system is breaking apart, and which was creating a very affluent society for us in the West, because we're basically rent-seeking on a global scale, apart from the people who are actually working. But that group of actually working people and who were actually entrepreneurs and trying to change the world were carrying a bigger and bigger load of people who were just, doing stuff that didn't really matter. And the BRICS are actually, I mean, you can say whatever you want to say about them, but I think the people in Russia and China, is, if there's one thing you can't say about them, is that they're lazy. They're working their ass off. I think, I'm not even sure if they have free time. They probably do have by now, because they're starting to get affluent. But they have been working their asses off forever, and that's, they have been buying our debt in order to sustain us. And now they say, like, okay, thank you very much, but we've got enough of this, and we got the resources and the commodities. You go have yourself, right? So I can't blame them for having that opinion. And in order to sort of to keep our dream going, people are becoming more and more intolerant under the guise of tolerance, because they want to keep their bubble intact.
War is peace.
Yeah,
like you said.
Yeah.
No,
yeah,
but
so they say, like,
world, man.
Sacrifice these people over here because they're not very open-minded or whatever, and then I can keep staying in my little bubble.
Clown world. There, I saw this banner on someone just a while ago where there was all the planets like Uranus, Saturn, whatever, and on Earth it was just a clown face.
Yeah, that's pretty sad. But I think the metaphor of the ram, to bring it back to your artwork, is I think very apropos. And maybe we should try a campaign to change Bitcoin into a ram. And to, like you say, I think the bull is a Wall Street symbol par excellence. And it's not actually what we want to be, right? I think people who are too focused on price go up are also doing a disservice to Bitcoin. I mean, it's nice and it's important, but it's not the most important thing, and it takes away from what really matters about Bitcoin. So,
well, thank you, and cool. I didn't necessarily do this in the spirit of wanting to change the image of the driving force of Bitcoin in this kind of a way, and I think good luck to us if we try to really change for it. It was more just the reminder of why we do this to begin with, because this was it was inspiring to be in Switzerland and be amongst these two whistleblowers doing it quite bravely, and just to be reminded of what this whole thing is about, because I think it did go from the early days to something like, let's save the world, to, you know, Bitcoin fixes everything, to now the majority of people going like, maybe I can save myself. And that's sure the defensive position, absolutely, but also, how would I put this?
Self-defeating.
Self-defeating. And the thing is, and I've said this a few times, I think, when you've given me the grace of being on your show a couple of times before, is that, you know, the Medici family, when they made their monetary innovation, they funded the best of the arts and sciences and education in order to make the Renaissance. And that's the ball that we have in our hands. We can't only retreat to our citadels and the defensive position, because in order to inspire people, we need to say that we do have the capacity to fix these problems, and we have the capacity to do the change in the face of whatever is the darkest before the dawn type situation. And the more we lose our own way, as in believing that we can, the more dark the world gets. And the self that you're saving into a citadel, I'm not sure if that's going to be as much of a save as many think that it's going to be. So
No.
in that sense, you know, the more we have as a hopeful message, of vision towards a future where we're going, where we pull through this, the better.
Yeah, and the best defense is offense, right? And I think the best way for the Bitcoin, you know, I was thinking about what is the single point of failure of Bitcoin. That's us, right? We are the single point of failure, and that's clearly what you see, right? And that's also why people should focus less on the price of Bitcoin, because it's in fiat, right? We're trying to replace fiat. You know, so it's kind of silly that we're super focused and obsessed about the thing that we're trying to replace.
Adopting to fiat rather than getting
right.
further away from it.
And then that's also, I found it so funny when Larry Fink says, yeah, Bitcoin is fine as an investment vehicle, or, you know, as an, what did he, yes, I have to look up the exact quote, but, you know, it's fine to invest in and to speculate on, but it's not a monetary, it's not a new monetary system. So yeah, then what the hell is it, right? Well, why would you invest in it or speculate on it if it wasn't what it says that it is, right? So it's
Can I ask you something? Can I ask you what you think of ordinals thus far, and how much research you've done to the Bitcoin inscription part of the culture?
Yeah, well, so ordinals, you got the whole debate between the maxis and sort of the NFT crowd, and the NFT crowd are saying, like, you know, we're using ordinals to you know, to bring utility to the Bitcoin blockchain, and also to, you know, have fun and to make it sexy and appealing to, you know, new people by creating first artworks on it, and I think they have a real good case for that. But the maxis and the crowd on the other side are saying, like, you're painting Bitcoin, right? So you're basically demolishing or undermining the monetary system that Bitcoin represents. And yeah, I find it a very difficult discussion, right? I sympathize with both sides of that argument, but I do think, you know, with ordinals, probably you can inscribe some of it, and it's, I mean, but I think eventually, you know, ordinals will probably move more. I think a second layer is more appropriate and more logical, like stacks, for example, something a layer 2 on Bitcoin, because of the speed at which you can do these things, and also at the costs. So even though I do like ordinals and what they represent, and it also makes a lot of sense for me that eventually everything will move to the Bitcoin blockchain. So I also think with time that a lot of these other blockchains and projects will probably disappear. Not all of them, but many. I mean, there's ridiculous amounts of blockchains out there, or you know, projects on other blockchains.
Well, but here's the thing that I had a problem with, because I went on the Tone Vase Bitcoin halving, and Jimmy Song was trying to rip me a new asshole, basically, by calling me a scammer for even entertaining the idea of doing an inscription. And I actually served him one of my best comebacks ever on a podcast, that having a conversation with him is a little bit like having sex with a cheese grater, which is like personally very, very masochistic and bloody and horrible, but entertaining for the public, I guess. And I managed to stomp him quite well in that conversation. But so here's the issue that I have with the whole thing, is that initially Bitcoin money was meant to be the first application of Bitcoin, not the main thing. Yeah. We were meant to be able to build a lot of things on Bitcoin. That was sort of the premise of it, that it's like the internet of money. But it's the next layer of something, not even the internet of money. It's just an applicable thing, and it hasn't, for good reason, evolved in many different ways. But now that people would make the innovation and put inscriptions on Bitcoin, if that then tanks this unstoppable force, then it's a kind of a whimper thing, that it points that it might not be as strong of a thing as, the whole movement is. And it's an uncomfortable conversation like this. Personally, thus far, what I've learned, I don't think it's going to tank it, or might really make it slower, and might really have a hindrance on a bunch of things. I don't think it'll wreck the chain, but it certainly does do things that are an uncomfortable conversation from the maxi point of view. And I think in that it is quite healthy, but it is an embarrassing sort of thing that you have an unstoppable force that is then wrecked by a JPEG.
I think it's just innovation, and many in the space who are sort of dealing with this discussion point out, that it's kind of sorts itself out, right? When you got a lot of congestion in the network, then everything slows down and it becomes so costly that they disappear again and then they come back again. And I think and I think also with the tainting of the coins, even though that is a valid point, I also think, coming back to what is the single point of failure of Bitcoin, I think it's not the tainting of the coins that is the problem. It is actually our freedom that is at stake. That is the problem, right? And also that's also why, even though I don't like politics a lot, especially these days, I do recognize that the only way to sort of make Bitcoin work for us in the short to medium to long term is actually for us to organize ourselves and to defend our freedom and to sort of allow Bitcoin to do its work. Because otherwise, wait, I have to plug in my computer. I'll be right back.
Sure. Technology, blessing and a curse.
Yeah, that's the problem when you do it early in the morning. Then you forget these kind of things.
Which I appreciate, by the way, that we kindly accommodated also, because we were meant to do this a couple of days ago already. But I thought doing this whilst traveling, I would have not had my microphone with me, and it was such an intense thing. And also, it's that now this is a little bit more appropriate because the auction is on. But to your point of what you were just saying there, I think also the freedom thing needs a little bit of a rebrand for the new generation, because they've been kind of conditioned from university academia going down that our freedom is like this right-wing thing, or whatever, and we're all responsible all the time of the health of the planet. It's like I saw this thing just on the something so trivial, and then it says save the planet, and I go like, what a tremendous amount of responsibility. Like, we're barely know sometimes when to put our socks on which way, and you're meant to be aware of how to save the planet all the time. And it's not, and freedom, like I've said many times, freedom of art is the same as freedom of speech.
True.
So if you're not for freedom of speech, you're not for freedom of art. Therefore, you're anti-art, you're anti-human. I think, and it's the anti-humanity that I have a point with, But the rebranding of freedom to something that is more maybe appropriate for the new generations is that everyone wants to pursue their happiness. Everyone wants to pursue their purpose or joy. Like, let's say joy. Uh, freedom of speech is joy. If you don't have freedom, you can't have authentic joy, because then you're forced to the table as opposed to invited to the table. And if you know the difference between what it feels like if you have to force your way to the table, or if someone forces you into the table, as opposed to someone gives you an invitation to be at the table where you want to be, you will know why joy cannot be forced or happiness can't be forced. And all of these things are at the core of it. They are the core of freedom. It's like the pursuit of happiness in your life, whether it's your relationship. Imagine being forced into a relationship as opposed to falling in love with someone authentically. And these are the same core things about what freedom represents. And I don't think it's being communicated to the new generations as to why they should stand for these hard things and do hard work. And even if your surroundings are trying to make you adapt to intolerable things, why you should still consider being socially in difficult situations sometimes. And it's joy, it's happiness. You have to work for your happiness and joy, and that's an uncomfortable part of this, but maybe something we should be reminded of more as to why we want to do this freedom thing.
Yeah, no, absolutely, 100%. And I think from different psychological research, it also shows that, where stuff, how value sort of gets created for us humans beings is sort of by putting in the effort, right? So when you put effort into something, then it becomes valuable. If there's no effort that goes into it, it can even turn into its opposite. And you even see it with emperors or rulers. When a ruler creates an empire, then that ruler usually gets revert, and people are not always, but the second ruler, like his son or his kin that comes after it, they are actually born into the position, and they are usually the worst kind of rulers because they couldn't put the empire together. But they are also often kind of despotic because they sort of think that it's their privilege, or that they're superior than the people that they that were what you say, that came together to build the kingdom, right? So, and I think that's also what I'm a big fan of Ian McGilchrist, the Master and His Emissary, which is a book which I actually read from cover to cover, and I can highly recommend. It's a beautiful book, but it's basically the master that generates value, and that generates meaning, and that generates joy, and his emissary is only there to rule the kingdom, and that is, he's appointed. And if the emissary gets out of control, as sort of the left brain and the right brain, which is what this book is about, it sort of destroys the joy and the value in the kingdom, right? It becomes sort of like a hall of mirrors. And I think that's a very sort of apropos. When you sort of buy the book and you only read the last chapter of the book, and it was written in 2014, it's almost exactly a prediction of what is happening right now. It's like the left brain is totally out of control. It's only the emissary. They lost complete touch with reality. There's only efficiency. There's only me, and sort of the real effort in creating stuff that is completely lost. Yeah,
Well,
it's a balance
I'll put it to
between
you
these.
this way. I'll put it to you this way, at least on my personal side, is that in the art world before, it's not that the museum directors or curators or gallery owners weren't in many times aware of me. And especially after I came into the crypto art and NFT space, they know who I am. They follow me. They, you know, I've worked with some of them, and they've very consciously made the decision of not to include me. And
Yeah.
it's not because I was doing the wrong thing, it's because I was doing the right thing. And it's just challenging so many different things. If you represent the real thing, that it's much easier to
Ignore.
either do the cowardly thing or then the self-interested thing, or then kind of figure out that, you know, this is. So when I talk about these things, like as uncomfortable as they are, let's say the paradigm of feminism, or, you know, something like that, i'm I'm less and less afraid to actually represent what it is that I'm doing, and justifiably so. And it's not like I don't have my flaws, or, you know, whatever things that could be said about me, but so is everyone else. We're all flawed, and we're all doing this thing the best that we can. But because it's so obvious that unless if I represent myself fully and what I believe and why I believe those things, and I try and adopt to this impossible to adapt to paradigm, I just end up hurting myself, and they hold all the power by the exclusion paradigm, because it doesn't cost them anything. It doesn't hurt them at all to not have me a part of this thing. And, you know, to hell with it. I don't care anymore.
Yeah, and
Not
it's
at all.
like a procrustes bet, right? You have to amputate stuff of yourself in order to fit in. And
Mm.
but that bet becomes smaller and smaller, because you know the things that you have to adjust to or comply with is becoming more and more, right? I think it was Tacitus who sort of said, like, the state, the despotism of a state is sort of measured by the amount of rules that spring up. So sort of the more rules that spring up, and the more sort of arbitrary they are, the more despotic the state becomes, and eventually sort of destroys itself. Well, you know, that's exactly what we're seeing. There's so many rules and so many things you can't say and you can't think and you can't do in order not to offend somebody else. That the procrustes bet that we're sort of trying to all fit into is becoming almost impossible to lie into. It's even, you know, just to be blunt about it, even for the people within the LGBTQ community who are, you know, very into sort of creating these limits and intersectionality. You know, within the intersectionality movement, you know, they're cannibalizing themselves, right? Because then they say, like, yeah, but you're not this and that and that, so, you know, we are sort of superior to you because you're, you know, you're also white, or you're a man, or whatever, right? So they created this whole hierarchy and all these labels and flags and you know, all the stuff that that they're actually trying to fight against they are reintroducing and making it almost unlivable for even their own
Power.
community.
It's very much about power in so many different ways, and it's the same, but not only to focus on the woke. It's the traditional finance institutions, and then
Yeah, yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
new value arguments, and then it's and it's the
And then
more I
also,
look at the conservative movement as well, is that the conservative movement has started to eat itself. When you look at the
yeah,
Candace Owenses and the you know, all whatever, when they're doing their own kind of like intellectual cutting uh, between themselves. So it's like the best that we can do, I suppose, is just to really represent who we are, and then take the pain when there are a bunch of people who don't like who you are, and
yeah.
they don't like what you say.
But those are also, and just to come back to what I just said earlier, right? There's many people in the LGBTQ community who actually don't feel represented by the LGBTQ
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah, definitely.
And
I
they
just
feel
had a
automatically
conversation with a gay
smarties.
friend of mine like that two nights ago. It was like he feels like the whole community has gone bonkers and crazy, but
Yeah,
he doesn't want to say that out loud because he knows the avalanche of things that would be coming his way if he
yeah,
was to say things like that. But again, it's like I've just lost fucks
yeah,
to give.
yeah. And you know, and I'm 100% for people to be whoever they want to be, and I don't mind people highlighting that. That's fine. and in Bitcoin Live we're all inclusive, these. But this is just really silly, and I totally agree with you. And I think personally, I'm not American, and I can't vote, but I really enjoy seeing Robert Kennedy, and that he actually became an independent, and that as an independent he's almost rivaling, or perhaps he is rivaling Trump. And I really hope personally that he wins, but this is just my personal opinion. And
he's so clearly the answer.
yeah,
He's so
I
clearly.
mean, when you look at this guy, I mean, if anybody is the answer, and maybe he also, has been corrupted. I don't know. Let's hope not.
I
But
don't
if
think so. I think it's very clear that he's prepared to die for the cause, and
I think so. Yeah.
it's when you come to be in the presence of those kinds of people, and you get reminded that their price is their life. It's not 10,000. It's not 100,000. It's not 100 million. They've come to the conclusion that the price for me doing what I do is that I likely might be killed in the process, which is the case with Kennedy so clearly. And the more I've listened to him, all the different kinds of problems that people describe on him, oh, his voice is screwed up and blah, blah, blah. I don't even hear the voice anymore at all. Like at the beginning, it was like I thought that, yeah, this is going to be difficult because he has that voice and maybe people don't care. But I think things are bad enough now. And the bad alternatives have been the thing for so long that getting someone who's in the true lineage of the Kennedy family, wanting to deserve that spot in that lineage properly, as crazy as that whole thing is for him, is truly inspiring. I mean, this is what I was saying to Brittany as well, because Brittany worked on the Hope campaign of Obama. That's where she famously really started her political footing, and the Hope poster and all those kinds of things. It's like the artistic community has completely and utterly failed Kennedy Jr. Like he actually deserves all of those songs by will.i.am and the Hope posters and whatever. He is that fucking guy. Where's the art?
Yeah. And we are a very small network, and I know also within our network there's different political appetites and preferences, which is fine, right? I mean, whatever. But I 100% agree. I think he's probably the guy, and I wish we had somebody like that in Europe. I mean, in Europe it's like dismal. Like there's nobody even close to that level that we have over here. And I think that's also the strength of America, right? That it can bring. So America is sort of like the extreme, the land of extremes. Like you got the worst and the best and everything in between. And Kennedy is just, he's like a diamond in the rough. And I hope by God that he wins. That will be really beneficial for the world if that happens.
But even Trump, I mean, I think it's a large degree influenced by Vivek Ramaswamy, and him kind of like now Trump is saying things like Ross should be brought home, and he's starting to understand the arguments of Bitcoin as well, in a different kind of light, or maybe he's adjusting to it and politically getting the libertarian vote or whatever. I don't know. But it seems that he's also heard and understood, because they've screwed with him in every single way so badly. But I don't want to. The Trump versus Biden is so damn toxic, and I suppose to some people there's, for Kennedy Jr. as well, there's toxicity because he wrote the real Anthony Fauci and his positions on against the massive propaganda machine like that. But he's so, to those who understand and can read the territory, it's like he's so the answer. He's just so obviously the person we should be like further exploring what he really represents. And
I think he's also right about that with the Fauci. I mean that people are sort of starting to come around to that, but and I understand it's very traumatic, and it's very it's almost impossible to imagine it to be true if you bought into it. But I'm afraid that these people will have a very hard pill to swallow once it all comes out. And when you sort of look at Kennedy and how he came around on that issue, because he was first he fought the official narrative, but when you sort of look into his development on that in that space, he did a lot of homework in order to sort of, take the opposite view and say the things that he did. He really did his homework, and but they're not going to debate him on, content or.
I think the whole apparatus, the power apparatus, depends on the post-truth era. They depend that there's been enough social pressure to not look into it, because the perception is that if you look into it more, that it's dangerous for you. Of course, in reality, the most dangerous thing you can do is not to look into it.
Yeah.
But because of the inherent tribality of how this has been set up, I don't think, or it's going to be very difficult to have the paradigm as in that the truth will come out, because we are in these potholes so deeply that, and the media is decentralized now to such a degree that it's hard to take one stance on things or whatever it is. So it's like this concoction of things that, as long as the landscape is very, very confusing, then the power remains in the hands of the few in this particular way. So maintaining cohesion and clarity in this kind of an era is a near impossibility, and especially I recognize my privilege as a person, that this is my job as an artist to try and figure this thing out, to have value, to put it into an artwork like BitRam, to go out there. This is what I need to be focusing on all the time in order to be able to think clearly or see where the value is. But if you're, let's say you're a father of three and you work in a corporation and your wife is working and you're doing, and you can barely make dinner for your kids and try and maintain a relationship between the two of you, and kind of like adapt to your crazy fucking boss, that they don't have the time nor the incentive to kind of dig into this stuff in a level that makes it tangible. So
so basically the only way this can change is for the system to break down, and for people to have a reality check, right? Which is usually how people change, right? It first has to go horribly wrong before they sort of think like, oh, I might have to change my life. But that's also what we aspire to with Bitcoin Live, by creating a really open space for everybody. You get as many inputs, unfiltered inputs as possible, in order to sort of orient yourself and take as much into account as you can. Because, like you said, you got the official mainstream media over here, which has a very strict line, and all the mainstream media are basically echoing their talking points. It's almost like they're one and the same. And then on the other side of that divide, you got a cacophony of different sounds and messages, and tons of disinformation and misinformation, or infotainment or entertainment on all these areas too, and simply an overload of information that and people have to work more for less, and deal with rising ideology and polarization and politicization and weaponization of every domain in their life. So obviously, if you're not into this stuff, and you're not curious, or by nature, sort of, which is fine, right? Some people are more doers than thinkers. That's totally fine. But if
imagine how much this has influenced your lives, as in that your channel got cancelled and all the work that you've put into it and whatever. The incentive mechanism is so clearly not for us to do this thing, that you need to be called.
Then you're on the right track.
You're a little crazy. Sorry?
Then you're on the right track, right? I mean, I see all these bans and shadow bans. I see them as badges of honor that you're actually doing something right. It's sort of the system. It's like the system become. I sometimes described postmodernism as an allergy against language. That postmodernists are sort of spreading an allergy against every word, as sort of this word connotes that. And then if you can't say this, then you can't say that, and then you can't say that, and then you can't say that. It's sort of also with people living a lie. If you're living a lie and it's a big lie, then you sort of have to start lying about everything in order to protect that first lie. So it sort of spreads like an oil spill, right?
Have you seen this documentary called The Century of the Self about
Yeah,
Edward
yeah.
Bernays?
Yeah, with Edward Bernays, yeah, the American cousin of Freud, and these, yeah, that's a fascinating, a really good documentary. I actually recommend it. Yeah,
Well,
yeah,
there was this because it was a fascinating. There's this Krishna Maharaj guy who talks on the internet. He's quite the punchy old guy, and he said that, for example, in the Nordics, if you look at the lineage of the development and how we got where we are, because it depends on also where you cut the line in history from where we go. Did we go from the fall of man to here, or let's say, for example, in the Nordics, we had animism, as in that everything is alive, and the molecules and material doesn't, in that sense, kind of, it's just slow vibration as opposed to, anything else. And magic mushrooms and those kinds of things were a part of traveling with us and human psychology for the longest of times. And as opposed to making us crazy, that was the device that kept us sane and grounded and in this sort of way. And it's not lost on me, especially after Jordan Peterson, what the influence of these patriarchal religions like Christianity and Judaism and Islam and what they have had. But let's say the animism of everything is alive and everything has a spirit is very quite closely tied to Vedic texts and those kinds of things, going back much further than what we perceive to be the major religions now. And in the Nordics, when we had this animism principle, then Christianity comes, and we sort of adopt the most boring and tedious version of Christianity that feels like death more than it feels like a celebration of life or this kind of thing. And we adapt to spirituality in our spirituality to this thing that feels very foreign to the foundation culture of the region. I suppose everywhere in the world it would be the same thing, but it's because it's such a boring version of Christianity that it feels so weird that it got adopted here. And of course, violence was a part of that adoption. But then where it evolves to is this nihilistic atheism from the most boring version of spirituality. And then once you've severed that connection to your soul to this degree, which has taken hundreds of years in order for it to reach the point of where we're now as the pinnacle, it doesn't take much to, and in a personal kind of way, it doesn't take more than one psychedelic trip and you're back online
yeah,
and kind of remembering of where you're coming from. And that's the eternal threat of the truth. You could say that there's centuries now being put into the project of severing people from their connection to the world, as opposed to now just having, whatever, COVID, or whether it was some other thing that has been a traumatic thing for us. But it's a long development cycle in this kind of way. Am I still? Oh, yeah. I'm just checking that I'm connected to the laptop, so I don't have the same thing happen to me that I have to replug myself in. But yeah, it's
yeah,
fascinating to consider how long of a project this sort of power grab or this power games in general, because for me it feels I never really wanted power over anyone else, but I realized very early on in my life when people did have power over me and did bad things with that power, that I would also rather die than have anyone have power over me not being able to do what I do. But the conundrum is that those who then sort of sell their souls for power and focus on nothing but power will have an advantage in power over many people, because that's
yeah,
what they focus on. So in one way, they work positively very hard to have that power. And if you're not focused on power, then you're at a disadvantage with the paradigm. But luckily, there are bigger things at work than what the human capacity for power is. And I would rather be aligned with that and sometimes suffer the consequences of be at a crossroads with these lunatics who've sold everything in their humanity in order to have the positions that they have, to try and have some sort of a resemblance of love in their lives, to
but
try
they
and
usually,
compensate with whatever fucking Lambo moon to, aren't I, whatever. And it's just sad.
But
so
it's also
fucking
sort of
sad, man.
a cycle of nature in a way, and usually in the end they are too basically it's their success that undermines them in the end, right? They're too successful at grabbing power, and they become too oppressive and too repressive, and it becomes too suffocating, and then the whole society gets into a crazy state, or an emergency state, and then people who actually don't want to take power feel that they have to step up, like Kennedy, in order to sort of restore some sanity and also to make life livable again. That and the other side, the power grabbers, they eventually erode their entire base or their foundation in order to make their case or to have support. Like, because basically, they're surrounding themselves with backstabbers, right? People like themselves. So as soon as the ship starts sinking, the first thing that they do is jump ship and let everybody die. So as the system sort of degrades and demolishes itself, or cannibalizes itself, it brings out the best in people as they sort of try to restore sanity, and the worst in people as sort of those people who created the system in the first place, jump ship and sacrifice everybody and everything in order to save their skin, right? So that's normally sort of the human process in these things. The only thing that's really different this time is the level of technology that they have at their disposal in order to dispose of us, right? So the AI and the nanotechnology and the robotics and the drones and the cybernetics and all that crazy stuff, the transhumanism, and anyway. It's clearly that they are making a run for that making a run for that holy grail of technology, and technology itself optimizes for efficiency. In other words, it centralizes power, right? And that's also what you see in human history, is sort of that disconnect from ourselves is also a disconnect from nature, which is also, for example, in Adorno's Dialectic of Enlightenment that you wrote with Horkheimer. It's sort of with enlightenment and reason taking center place, it sort of disconnects people from a more organic way of life, and it sort of elevates technology to a new level. And technology sort of helps sever us from the seasonalities, from the limitations that nature puts on us, and that forces us to deal with it. So we don't have to deal with nature around us, because it's becoming colonized and put into nice, neat, compartmentalized spaces. But eventually, it also relieves us of dealing with ourselves and each other, right? Because there's all kinds of ways to make it easier and to ignore other people, because it's all automated, and that's sort of this driving force in human nature to eliminate obstacles through technology. But eventually, what it does is it obsoletes us, right? Because as all the obstacles are deleted and overcome, those very obstacles are actually what gives life meaning, right? That's what we started with. It's you could have everything you wanted, but then it's worthless, right? Because you didn't put any work in it. So this.
Well,
So
imagine this, the being the irony of things.
I want to add one more thing. So
Sure,
one of
sorry.
the cool things about Bitcoin is actually that it optimizes for inefficiency. So it's the only technology out there that actually, because it creates redundancy. And redundancy is actually everything that the current system is trying to eliminate, right? But redundancy is exactly what we need. We need stuff that we don't need, right? So we need more of that. Like,
That's a really interesting point. I actually have never considered that. That might be a theme for an artwork, actually.
yeah, that's actually a theme in my recent interview that I did for a magazine, which will arrive soon. It's in Dutch. I'll have to translate it and ask if I can. But and in that way, Bitcoin mirrors nature, right? Because nature is full of redundancy. You got DNA in every cell, right? Why the hell do you need DNA in every cell? Is that completely redundant? Like, wouldn't it be more efficient to have it in one place? No, because it sort of makes it resilient, right? So basically, Bitcoin. That's also why Dan Held wrote those brilliant pieces about Bitcoin being an organism that reacts and adapts, right? It has all the features of an organism, even if it's not fully self-aware. But that makes it anti-fragile and resilient.
Well, because it reminds me of this thing that I learned at some point that in the Finnish forests every fall, I don't know how many endless tons of blueberries get rotten into the forest because no one picks them. And then at some point there were these Asian immigrants who learned about this situation, and it's a wealthy berry, like it's considered a delicacy. So they started coming over and going to pick the berries, and then all of a sudden it starts to become a local problem and a perception problem and a competition problem. So it's in alignment with what you were saying. But why I so rudely nearly interrupted you there earlier with your good point was that because you were saying something about the efficiency and work, and given that we both woke up early to this and what's been happening during the last few days and how tired we both were to kind of wake up to this conversation, to put in the work, and how much work it has been for the both of us, for you to have the channel, for you to know all the things that you do in order to process this thing, and for myself as well, it's been a full-time job my whole life to try and make sense of these systems, to take this comprehensive whole into consideration. I mean, my first real, I suppose, teacher on how to think was Ken Wilber with integral theory, and how to look at holistic systems and sort of arrive at some conclusions of value. But then ironically, there's going to be a lot of people who would have maybe listened to 2 seconds or not even click on this because it was two white guys. So all this work is rotten berries in the forest to the majority of them who actually should be maybe hearing this perspective to balance out their perspective, but they would never even touch this conversation in the slightest because it just for reasons X and Y. Yeah. So this is the shame paradigm I think we're in, that we can be reduced to just two whatever white guys and not worthy of being listened to in the slightest, and we have to make peace with that fact.
True. Yeah, and then eventually, as in an evolutionary process, then some of these berries or some of these fruits will bear trees, and some will wither away and die, right? So, and that's also why you need a redundancy in the system to in order of a calamity, that you have a backup, right? It's like endless backups of a system. And with a centralized system, which is focused on efficiency gains only, it becomes super fragile, right? It's like a top athlete, and an athlete has to, it's on the one hand, it's brilliant, right? What a person like that can, but if somebody like that springs his ankle, he'll be an invalid for the rest of his life, right? So, and then he will lose everything, his career. He just maybe has something nice to look back on, in his elder days. But sort of the whole financial system is like that athlete, and it or that with his car or a motorcycle, I should say, and driving along this obstacle course. And the obstacle course becomes more and more advanced, and the jumps that he has to do are becoming even more crazy, and eventually he will die, right? Because because you can't optimize endlessly into forever. Eventually it becomes too hard to run that course, and then the whole system falls apart, right? And that's why you need redundancy. People like us, that when the obstacle course burns, a small tree will sprout, and a new society will spring up, and that's why you need to plant these seeds, even if they look very small and insignificant and redundant. Eventually that's where the new system will spring up, because the other system is is on a self-defeating collision course. I think we should round up with that because I haven't had breakfast yet.
Yeah, that'd be nice. And I need to get back to editing this other video about this auction as well. Nicholas, I'm always grateful for having these conversations, as masochistic as it is for me to keep aligned with representing what I actually represent in this crazy world. I appreciate the very same thing in you, and it's a brotherhood. It's really, really great to have these chats with you. It's also a form of exercising our own mental health to realize that there are people who see through a bunch of different bullshit. We are brave enough to say those things out loud, and also every time with you I learn something new, and I don't mind the fact that I don't always agree with you, and you don't mind the fact that you probably don't always agree with me. And it's a friendship in kind of this trying to learn from one another and maintain some sanity in this world, and it's really cool, man.
Yeah, same here. And I love the artwork that you did, and good luck with the auction. And I can't wait to our next conversation, Vesa.
Thanks a lot, bro. It was really fun.
Take care.